Now let's start to build up the polygon body of our dinosaur using a generator. So in Cinema 4D, even though we're working with polygons, we're going to be building with polygons, and that really gives us a lot of flexibility. Cinema 4D is a very unique workflow in that there are a lot of different generators and tools that we can build up in a hierarchy here in our Objects Manager that will allow us a lot of flexibility as we start to build up those basic shapes before we start combining things together. And so let's take a look at one of the ways that we can build up something like this long, slender body that we talked about in the last lesson. So this is sort of a cylinder shape that's going to flow in this direction. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to go ahead up here to our splines, and I'm going to choose a cubic spline. And these are just different, these are kind of primitives that you can create. These are basic splines that you can draw out. These are just lines, basically curves that we can use to create actual geometry. So I'm going to go ahead and draw out a cubic curve, and I'm going to start from the tail and just start to click points kind of along the center of where I think this is, and I'll just try to make them sort of even, coming into the center of the body and then up the neck, and I'll stop kind of right behind the head. Okay, now at any point you want to come in and move these points around, you can just go ahead and select those points, move them where you think they should be. But really, one of the nice things about working with this sort of hierarchy is the fact that we can modify this after the fact, after we even we get geometry on there. So we can go ahead and sort of line these up before we actually get started with our putting the geometry on this. Okay. The next thing that we need to do is have a shape that's going to be creating the geometry along this curve. So you might think we want to have a circle. I'm actually going to use the inside. So we have the circle here. I'm actually going to use the inside because I can control the number of sides, and I want it to be linear because I know I'm going to smooth it later. I just want to have the linear sides. Those are going to correspond to me to polygons, so I'll have a very good idea of what that's actually going to look like when we get the polygon geometry created from it. So I'll go ahead and drop that in. So we just have a spline and then this inside. Now there are attributes that we can change over here, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it as is for now. You can see the radius is 200 centimeters and the sides are basically the main things that we can change. You can also change the roundness of it, but I don't want that. I want to have a nice linear points there. Okay, so to actually create our geometry, we're going to be using something that is, if you've worked in 3D at all, it's going to be familiar to you, called NURBS. Now normally you think of NURBS as another type of geometry apart from polygons. Well, these NURBS generators are going to use these splines, and you can use parametric splines and so forth to create temporary geometry that we can then convert into polygons to make our lives a lot easier. So even though we're working with polygons, there are a lot of different tools we can use and inject into our workflow that'll make things go a lot quicker for us. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and drop in a sweep NURBS and kind of get an idea. It takes a one spline and sweeps it along another. So to get this to work, we need to actually parent these underneath the sweep NURBS. Okay, so we want to go ahead and drag the inside underneath our sweep NURBS, and you can see a little inset there, and then also the spline we want to drop underneath there. Okay, so we have the spline at the bottom, and then the profile up here on the top. So in Cinema 4D, you'll find that the order in many cases makes a lot of difference, how things are ordered underneath the hierarchy. Okay, so right now it doesn't look really like it should, and that's just because our inside is not oriented in the correct direction. So it's going along the Z, so we want it to be oriented along the XY. So we'll change the plane, and now you can see that geometry sort of flowing in the correct direction. Okay, so now at this point, the advantages come into play here because I can come in and modify any of the splines underneath this, and the sweep NURBS updates. So I'm going to go ahead and make this sort of as wide as the widest part. So it looks like about 70 or so from on this the body here. Okay, and I also want to come in and change the number of divisions here. Right now it is set to 6, which is pretty low. I'm going to go ahead and change my display to rod with light lines. So I want to increase that number. So under sides, I'm going to increase it up to, let's say 12 would be good. And I also want to have a nice even distribution of polygons along the length of this. So that's going to be controlled via our spline. So we're going to go ahead and select our spline. And then I want to actually choose as our intermediate points, which is kind of how this is smoothed out. I want to choose uniform, and then I'm just going to decrease that number. So just so we get a nice even distribution of polygons. You could take it to 2. Will give you pretty square polygons. 1 will give you, in this case, something that is a little lighter to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with 1 for now. So now we have this sort of tube, but we really need it to be thin here, thicker and thinner. We can control this via our sweep. So if we jump into our sweep, let's go into our object tab here, and down under details you may have to open up your details. We'll go ahead and leave all of this as is. Under details you'll see that there's a little grid here under scale, and the line up here is at 1, so it's full scale the whole way. We can control the scale of our profile along the spline using this graph here. So this is, the front is going to be actually the tail here because we started it here. So as we take this down, you can see that getting smaller and smaller, so that's taking the scale of that down. So we can take that almost down to nothing. Okay, just looking at the shape here, maybe something like that. Okay, you can play with the tangent, so that's going to control how that curve transitions up here. And so right now it's transitioning from very small to very big, but we actually want the large area here and then go back down to small. So we can grab this, move this down, which will decrease the size of the neck, but now we need to add another point in here. So we'll control click, and now we can start to add a point in here to bring it back up. And so now it's just a matter of tweaking our curve to get it sort of as close as we want to get it. So I can come in here and tweak this handle, take this handle down a little bit. We want it to be sort of as smooth as possible. Okay, so kind of bringing it up in here. Okay, maybe something like that. Take that down a little bit. You might need to add another point in here to kind of control some of this curvature. Coming in here, that looks pretty good. Okay, and then we might want to come in here and use this to modify our shape a little bit. If I can grab it here. So kind of bringing that down, making that a bit larger. Now at this point we can still come in and modify our spline. So we could come in here, select the spline, and select any of those points and modify that. You can see how that updates, so we can kind of bring that down a little bit if you need to modify something. So you don't have to get it exactly, but I would just make it kind of close. You can see up here the neck is kind of wide, and so we can come in here, and that's actually the tail, if I remember. Yeah, so we want to modify the other side here. So kind of bring this down. You can play with the tangency or add new points. So maybe you want to add a new point in here. You take that tangent handles down a little bit to get kind of a smoother transition. And just come in here and kind of modify this a little. All right. So again, now this is probably want to get rid of that point maybe. Well, that's pretty good. You want to get something that's fairly close. Now a lot of this geometry we'll be adding here after the fact, but we just want the basic shape of the body. All right, so now you'll notice geometry at the ends of this geometry, of this body here. So we want to go to caps, and you can see right now it's just set to cap. So that's just adding geometry on the end here. All right, so this start again will be the tail. So we can take the cap off of the end, which is up here. Now on the tail, we want to actually add a nice curved end to this tail. So instead of just choosing cap, we'll choose fillet cap. Now you can see how the whole body sort of enlarged a little bit. So what I want to do is come down here and hit constrain, and that will allow us to create this cap without changing the shape of our body. So it's going to enlarge if we don't have that on. You can see, and we've already got the shape sort of where we want it, and so we want to keep that constraint on. Okay, and so I want to make this kind of curved, so I'll increase the radius, and I'll increase the number of steps to maybe 3. Okay, so we get a nice curved line. Now we're still going to have this sort of cap on the end, and I'm going to change this to the type here to quadrangles, regular grid. I'm actually going to rebuild this, and so it's not as important that you kind of modify that, but I'm going to go ahead and set that thus. So that'll give us this geometry here, and then the cap as well. So that'll give us that rounding on the end. Okay, so again, a lot of flexibility here in creating our geometry using our SweepNURBS generator with the 2 splines. So now there are a couple ways we can get this to be a polygon object, which is what we need it to be. We can go ahead and, let's say, convert to a polygonal object, just as we looked at earlier. Hit C, but I want to make a copy, so I can go ahead and say current state to object, which will take the current state with the formers and everything and create a new copy of this. Now I want to, let's say, keep our generators just in case we need those. So I'm going to go ahead and create a null, just a node here, and let's just call this, we'll call this raw NURBS, and I'll drag this SweepNURBS underneath, and let's turn off the visibility. Okay, I'm just clicking on these little dots here. And so red means invisible in the view and in the render. So now we're left with our polygon geometry. So we still need some to clean this up a little bit, and we only need half of this to work with, but we've got the basic shape built out. So let's go ahead in the next lesson and take a look at kind of cleaning this up and preparing it to receive some of the other geometry, things like the legs and so forth. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that starting in the next lesson.